So welcome everybody. It's really a pleasure and also I would say very emotional to have a chance to start this conference that is also the moment of launch of a new initiative, what is, ideally going to become an interdepartmental center that is covering this new exciting field of the biological, psychological, and behavioral effects of culture that is becoming so important in the global agenda. I will not make an introduction to the conference now because I think that the best way is also to start from the institutional salutations and to have also an idea of the context where we are. And without further ado, in this regard, I would like to give immediately the floor to the new president of our university, Professor Rino Stuppia. Rino.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. It's a real pleasure for me to give you my warmest welcome in our university and in this very exciting meeting, which is in my opinion particularly relevant because in the program of my election I had two key points, two key words that were culture and internalization. Of course, here we are. Culture, in my opinion, is something that is different from the number of things that you know, that you have learned. Culture is the environment in which you grow up and the way in which this environment is able to change your mind, but also to change your body. And also, I will tell later in my lecture, also the way in which environment is able to change our genetic expression. So for us, for the University Gabriele D'Annunzio of Chieti-Pescara, is a huge opportunity to share idea and expertises with people from all the world. And I hope this will be the first step for a long journey that will bring this university to different frontiers and with a lot of possible derivations from this work. And what is most important, in my opinion, is that we have different expertises, people from different fields, and this is the first step to a multidisciplinary way of thinking research and way of thinking academia. So again, welcome everybody here. I think that we will have a wonderful day of study, and you will see me later for the lecture in which I will tell you something about culture and genetics. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rino. We go on at this point, and I would like to call at this point Stefano Sensi, the head of the Department of Neurosciences.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure that you have better things and bigger things to do, so I'll be very, very short and brief. Welcome to everybody. I'm pretty sure that we will intermingle tonight at the dinner and have interaction, vis-a-vis interaction. Our department is a neuroscience and neuroimaging department, so it's very, very keen to this field of studies. I'm a neurologist and I'm really, really interested in how the environment and culture shape the way we think and actually shapes the state of health of our body. So we'll follow some of the lectures and I have to go after that. But again, see you tonight.
And at this point, I will give the floor to Lorenzo Pignatti, the head of the Department of Architecture.
Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you, Luigi Sacco. Thank you, everybody that has organized this beautiful conference, launching an extremely beautiful and interesting project. You know, we are really excited about it. I'm the director of the Department of Architecture. As architects and planners, we have been always thinking about the environment, about the quality of architecture, the quality of spaces, right? You know, but somehow we never thought that there would be other people, right? You know, collaborating in projects such this one here, where we can really gain from the experiences and expertises from each other. So I'm excited that this project puts together we as architects and planners, together with neurologists, together with psychologists, economists, and so far and so on. I'm very excited about this sort of interdisciplinary kind of nature of this project. And not only this conference, but I think that this project is going to produce a series of kind of of years in the following following years. Very exciting because it's a unique project. I think there's going to be a lot of interest from also people from outside. So I'm really thanking everybody. Again, I think that we should leave more space for the presentations that are coming later. But thank you for involving us from architecture in this specific initiative.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. And now I would like to call to the floor Antonio Di Battista, who's the head of the Department of Philosophical, Pedagogical, and Economic Quantitative Sciences.
Thank you very much. I'm a very pleasure to introduce my department that was born, that this project is born in our department. So I'm very pleased. And my department is the right department to host this project, this center, because my department is composed for 4 areas: the philosophical, pedagogical, economics, and statistics. So is a is a very good scenario. So I think is the right home to host my this project. Anyway, just a 2 words for give. I don't want to leave the space to the scientific work. So I enjoy the work to the scientific committee, and anything is right. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present my department. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tonio. And at this point, I would like to give the floor to Agostino Consoli, the head of CAST.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Sacco. Thank you, Professor Palumbo. I have the honor and the privilege of being your physical host, being the person in charge of the structure which is hosting you this afternoon. And I'm very proud of this for 2 main reasons. One is that, as Rino said before, culture is different from erudition. Erudition is the notion you can learn, and nowadays you can learn it with a touch of the keyboard. Culture is the way you can use this notion you have gathered and use them to the profit of yourself, of your family, of your society, and of your community. And this is, I think, is what these meetings are about. Working together, trying to understand how to use the notion for a better health, physical and psychological. The concept of planet health is now what is driving the effort of scientists in the effort of building a better life. And in this effort, you cannot have distinction between the clinician, the basic researcher, the psychologist, the economist, and the architect. The way we built our town has a lot to do with our disease. And being an expert, being a person with devoted life to metabolism, this is particularly true for disease like diabetes and obesity. And the other thing is that this building was built, pardon me the fighting of the words, was built for putting together different expertise and different technologies. And this is the way we are trying to do it, the effort we have been doing for the last 20 years, which is going forward. And I believe that initiative like this will actually what this building was built for. Having said that, knowing that the most appreciated salutation are those as short as possible, I leave you to the work and will enjoy the conversation for this afternoon. Thank you very much.
At this point, I think that we have closed the first round of institutional salutation, so I would like to come to invite here my colleague Riccardo Palumbo to start with the general introduction to the conference. Now we can really start diving into what is the topic of this 2 days of joint work and reflection. So I will basically start to briefly reconstruct the motivations that led us to launch this kind of initiative. You know, for a very long time, culture has been a sort of Cinderella, both in the sciences field and in the policy field. Because of course, clearly, I mean, speaking of culture in many cases is seen as something that has to do with people leisure time, so things that are, you know, generally, of course, interesting, but basically to specialists and certainly not comparable to the urgency or to the importance that is related to big challenges like, let's say, environmental change, or, for example, mental health, physical health, or, for example, migrations, all kinds of different crises that are generally considered, of course, much more prioritarian. So culture is basically what we deal with when we have nothing serious to do. So something that is really related to our spare time and free time. Moreover, some stigma related to culture has also been, of course, built from the fact that, to many, culture is very elitarian. This is not really something that appeals to everybody, or at least the definition of culture that we have agreed to consider the focal point of our attention. And we have tended to think that basically culture is something that is, let's say, the pastime of the well-off, people who are wealthy, healthy, and well-educated. So basically we are excluding the most part of the population, and at the same time probably also those who could benefit the most from the opportunities that culture is creating. So with this in mind, of course, it becomes difficult to imagine or to expect that culture can make a difference in any way, which is not just, let's say, giving some, again, nice opportunity also to mark their social distinction to the people who are actually able to enjoy, let's say, sophisticated museum exhibitions or theater plays or literary festivals and so on and so forth. But the truth is that this way of thinking of culture is absolutely an historical artifact. And it's an historical artifact that is deeply related to the history of the West. So it's ourselves, in particular, Europe and North America especially, that have constructed this idea of culture as, let's say, something that is really related and confined to a specific sphere of human experience that is considered secondary with respect to other ones. But let's consider what culture has originally been for humans. What we know is that culture is deeply related to human survival. And I just make a simple example that shows this very clearly. I mean, humans have been, for most of their evolutionary history, hunters and gatherers. As hunters and gatherers, the main problem has always been managing the energetic balance. Literally, this means that if you don't have enough energy, for example, to run in the morning, for example, to chase prey or to pick fruits and vegetables, literally you're starving. So if you run out of energy, you're dead. Especially in a civilization in which storage is almost impossible. Because as hunters and gatherers, you're just traveling and walking around your territory all the time. What you would expect from a naive point of view is that if this is the problem, so if humans are so deeply concerned about their energy balance, the most reasonable thing to do when they, for example, at the end of a long day of chasing and harvesting, are finally resting, what they would reasonably do is literally resting, of course, recovering their energy. What do we know from the anthropological record? Is that these people literally, systematically used a significant part of their theoretically resting time to sing and dance or to tell stories. Literally, activities that are energy consuming. Some of them extremely energy consuming, especially in a perspective like this. So you would say, okay, these people are crazy. I mean, evolutionarily speaking, they don't understand what is the evolutionarily rational. The problem is that they are much wiser than we tend to be, because what they understood so clearly is that those kind of activities were absolutely quintessential for survival. Just to make an example, if you have to chase a large prey, for example, a deer, you need to have a coordinated action. You cannot chase a deer alone. So the only way to do this is to build group cohesion. How do you build group cohesion? Well, it turns out that one of the best ways we learned, in some sense ex post, is to create activities that entail synchronized movement, collective synchronized movement. One of the best ways to build group cohesion is this. And for example, the military know this very well because drills are exactly this. Why people are marching in a courtyard for hours and hours and hours? This seems the epitome of the stupidity of the military according to certain, outside points of view. It's not. I mean, what was, by the way, studied very clearly and closely by social psychology starting from the 50s is this, that this coordinated movement in time is one of the strongest and quickest ways to build group cohesion. And this example, synchronized movements, shows something very clear, that not only these activities are crucial for survival, but they have been so deeply ingrained into our own biological constitution that literally we have pathways for them. So what we understand today is, for example, not only that this synchronized movement builds group cohesion, but that this synchronized movement, for example, also brings about biological forms of synchronization. For example, the studies done on certain types of community rituals, for example, like fire walking, have shown quite interestingly that, for example, there is a level of cardiac synchronization between participants and spectators to this kind of rituals that is inversely proportional to the social distance. So the closer you are in terms of family relationship or let's say friendship relationship with the fire walker, the closer your heartbeat synchronization with that of the fire walker. That, by the way, is a kind of distance action that we don't know actually how it can happen in the first place. So these kind of examples are just a few anecdotal, we would say, example of something that we are increasingly discovering today. The fact that there is such a profound biological hardwiring of our response to cultural stimuli that this cannot be, a chance artifact of evolution. This is clearly a very strong co-evolution that has probably happened, as far as we can tell today, in a space of something like 400,000 years. So an extremely long-term, let's say, biological design that clearly tells that cultural experiences are nothing like, let's say, just fruition of free time for the socially privileged. They are something that is absolutely ingrained in our human nature. So what is the point? The point is that we are finally rediscovering the wheel, in some sense. We are finally rediscovering that this is actually the case, that this kind of possibilities open up extremely interesting and productive pathways, for example, for new policy design. But before entering into this, let's just in 1 minute briefly comment on, but then why in the West we develop such a strange conception of what is the social role of culture? Why in the end we concluded that culture is just a pastime for the privileged people? Well, this has been an extremely complex artifact of our own cultural history in the West. In particular, the fact that culture has been increasingly associated to activities that were literally transgressing social order. To make an example, the Greek theater in the 5th century before Christ is clearly related to the birth of democracy in the Greek city-states. What is the problem of democracy in a social context in which nobody had an experienced democracy before? That you have to have a public discussion about laws. Before there was the tyrant, so basically it was, let's say, the God mandate to the tyrant about what the law is, and there was no discussion about this. But when you start to have an open discussion about laws, about what is just or not, it's not just about what's happening today. It's about what could happen in all possible circumstances. Because otherwise, I mean, the good law could not be the one that is tailored on the current situation. A good law should be able to cover so many different scenarios. So to do this, what do you need? You need counterfactual reasoning. You need the strong capacity, the cognitive capacity to imagine possible hypothetical scenarios and to understand what would happen if. From the cognitive point of view, as humans, we are not particularly well-versed in counterfactual reasoning. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why, for example, people today say, okay, vaccinations in the end weren't really important because in the end we are out of this and probably we would have been out of that also without vaccinations. You know, this way of reasoning, which is clearly, I mean, crazy from the logical point of view, is first of all a patent violation of counterfactual reasoning, because of course they are reasoning on the basis of a scenario that is not the one on which they are basing, in some sense, their critique to vaccination in the first place. But this is just an example of how unnatural for many people is counterfactual reasoning. So what was one of the functions of theater in a moment in which democracy emerged was exactly to develop a social platform for counterfactual reasoning. But in a traditional society, in which, for example, there is a very, very strong relationship between certain types of moral principles and traditions, of course, starting to tell stories about what happens if I kill my father and marry my mother could sound a bit odd, and especially people who are just proposing this kind of histories are likely to be killed in a traditional society. So we really needed to create a sort of state of exception for artists, inventing the artist and inventing the public, for a very particular reason that, by the way, was extremely well motivated. As a consequence of this, however, in the West, we have developed a tradition in which there is this separation. There is a monopoly of imagination on a few people called the artists, or more generally the creative people, and then there is the public, that more or less can be illuminated by the creative power or superpower of the artist. This thing has been very beneficial, for example, for creating new artistic and aesthetic ideas, but has also been extremely counterproductive in terms of the social inclusion that is related to these artistic practices, where these artistic practices have, in some sense, developed in a different way, in the Global South. In the Global South, this state of mind has basically arrived only when it was the European or Western colonization importing this kind of practices. Most of the time in the Global South, and still today, we have a very natural idea that culture is collective participation and is deeply related to the local historical and cultural traditions. So from this point of view, we are not only rediscovering this incredible possibility of culture to, for example, foster very, very complex processes of attitudinal and behavioral change, but we are also linking this, quite surprisingly, I would say, to the decolonization agenda. What we are experimenting now is a situation in which, maybe for the first time in decades, the West needs to learn and needs to listen to exactly those kind of counterparts that have been sometimes quite condescendingly treated as, let's say, still to be developed parts, also from the point of view of the models of cultural participation. So it's interesting that we are in a situation in which there is also a fantastic opportunity for a new form of global cultural democracy, but especially in the light of what I was saying, and then I'm going to quickly conclude. Interestingly, what we are learning in some sense rediscovering the wheel, returning to the deep causes of, let's say, attitudinal and behavioral change driven by culture and the associated biopsychological pathways. What we are learning is that there is really an incredible opportunity, for example, to tap on the capacity of culture to help, for example, with emotional regulation, for example, of well-being states, even immune response from what we are starting to see, and even of course, changing behaviors from the pro-social point of view, for example, in terms of intercultural dialogue, or from the point of view adoption of pro-environmental behaviors. This kind of agenda is becoming an increasingly shared agenda also from umbrella international organizations, and happily we have today very qualified representative from some of these organizations that can really also give us a perspective of how this agenda is being today adopted and scaled up by their respective institutions. But this really means that we have an incredible space of possibility that so far was unthinkable, in which culture is no longer the Cinderella, but it can really become, in some sense, a new, let's say, platform for imagining a new approach to policies, not just cultural policy, policies, in which seemingly intractable problems can be not solved, but at least partly treated through angles that so far were not familiar. And these angles have all to do with culture and with this renewed perception of what culture is and why it's so important for humans. I'm particularly proud that the University of Chieti-Pescara took this challenge very seriously because, of course, there is lots, and I'm so proud and grateful that so many colleagues from all over the world are joining us to imagine what kind of joint action we can have on these topics. But at the moment, a center that comprehensively tackles the full spectrum, let's say from genetics and molecular biology up to behavioral sciences, to examine what are the effects of culture on all these various dimensions of human activity and existence. I'm so proud that the university took this challenge very seriously and so launched this platform that we hope can become a gateway for all the various centers and all the various lines of work and research that are today so scattered, sometimes so difficult to map, and that also we hope through our own initiative can become more cohesive and probably also can give birth to a shared research and policy agenda. So thank you so much for being here. It's an ambitious effort, but I think it's also extremely fun and I think even engrossing from the point of view of the incredible potential that we can leverage upon on this. And this said, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Riccardo Palumbo.
Thanks, Pierluigi. Pierluigi defined art and culture, their origins, their functions. I would like to briefly focus on how Pierluigi and I came to propose this event here at the University of Chieti-Pescara as a step preceding the establishment of a new research center. A few years ago, I don't know if we have a presentation. Is it possible? Okay. A few years ago, we started building a network of relationships among colleagues from different different disciplines to study the neuro and behavioral aspect of economic decisions. This university presented several promising characteristics. It's a place with several areas of excellence. First of all, consider that the Department of Neuroscience, one of the departments that host us, ranked first at the initial evaluation exercise for the Department of Excellence in the field of physics, and second in the most recent exercise. It's also a place that allows researchers a great deal of freedom of action. Actually, it's not so easy to find an institution that give this kind of opportunity. It's a place where connections are easy to make. The establishment of the PhD program, the Business and Behavioral Sciences PhD program has helped to enhance the bond and connections and contamination among colleagues from different disciplines. So far, we had, since the foundation in 2016, we have had 56 PhD students, you can see now, 28 of whom they are still in training. So far, these students have collectively contributed to the publication of 368 scientific papers. These articles involve a total of 582 co-authors. It's an incredibly profuse network of relationship involving numerous institutions, research centers, of course, from different countries and a wide range of scientific disciplines. Pierluigi and I have thought that this would be a fertile ground for a research center that systematically study the bio-behavioral impacts of art and culture on health, sustainability, and social cohesion. I extend we extend our gratitude to all the participants, collaborators, and sponsors who have made this conference possible. In particular, the PhD students who have been tirelessly working for weeks to organize this event. A special thanks, in alphabetical order, of course, goes to Alessandro, Andrea, Elena, Francesca, Giulia, Johnny, and Stefano. Now together, let us let us explore the fascinating interplay among art, culture, and the human experience, unveiling new insights that can shape a better, healthier, and more sustainable future for all. Thank you, and enjoy the conference.